further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Sue Getz. Sue is somebody who is a author. She's an award-winning author, garden designer, and speaker around the country. She's got 2 books, the second of which is A Taste for Herbs, also the name of this webinar. And we're so happy to have her. Her business is called The Creative Gardener, which I do love that name. Gives you a lot of opportunity for great designs. And she works with personal outdoor spaces. She does garden coaching and is a full-fledged landscape designer. Great speaker, does a lot of garden shows as well. She was named as the Educator of the Year by the Washington State Nursery and Landscape Association, and shares her love of the garden and herb growing all over the U.S. So lots of great publications to her credit, and we're thrilled to have her with us today. So Sue, I don't want to take any more of your time. You're welcome to begin. Welcome.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me as well. So we're gonna get right to it. It's time to get out in the garden, even if it's visually on your screen for just a moment. So I'm gonna pop back into this, and we're gonna get started. So this talk is really a taste for herbs. So I'm going to journey you through an herb garden, and I want you to really kind of think about maybe what you're growing, what you're doing, because truly I love gardens that give back. I call myself a little bit of a selfish gardener because I really love the details of a garden, of course, in my design realm, but you know, it really is about the plants. Come on, we're gardeners, right? And so I want plants that give me back. What are you going to do for me, plant? And so a lot of times that is just the huge category of herbs and how we use them for fragrance and flavor and nurture our bodies, all of those things. And so what we would journey to today is the flavor. And you don't have to have a really big herb garden. It can be as simple as a container overflowing with you know, mint, as you can see, whatever it may be. It's just how you gather and grow plants in your garden that can give you more than just kind of sit out in the garden and have to be weeded around, which we need to do that as well. But a lot of times, you know, when we kind of walk through the garden, here's some fun container garden herbs, which is one of my favorite ways to grow. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I always have people ask me, especially when it comes to herbs, what should I grow? And I always say, you know what, we're going to start with grow what you love. I mean, if you don't like a certain flavor of an herb, then don't grow it, because don't weed around it all the time, or have to water it, or whatever you have to do to it. Just grow what you love. And if it's one thing, grow lots. And if it's a 10 or 20 or whatever your garden allows you to do, you grow what you're going to eat and use, because that's the goal here, is what you're really going to love to do. And so one of the things I like to do is kind of ask you to get to know the personality of the herb a little bit. One thing I'll say throughout this whole program that you're going to see today is these are really plants you probably already know. And I'm going to hopefully guess that you're growing a lot of these. So what I like to say is maybe I'll introduce you a little something new about an old friend. So you're already growing it, but you didn't know you could do this with it, or whatever those things are. And so you get to know the plants themselves. And this is the journey that I want to take first, is how do you start to recognize leaves, how you grow them successfully, all of those things. So there's a few things on the list that you see here. Some do well from seed. You can plant them from seed and they'll do just fine. Dill, easy. Chives, easy. Probably even find them a little bit kind of out there in your garden more than they want to be. Cilantro, basil. So those are things hopefully you've started from seed already at this time of the year. You know, they're already kind of up above ground already. And then there's some of the herbs that I think are much better from cuttings. And when I say cuttings, I mean either you've taken a cutting of a plant and propagated it to give it roots, or you've purchased it at your favorite nursery. Those are plants that are just ready to go. They're out of the ground, they're cuttings. And the reason some of these just do better from cuttings are very specific. Lavender, because its germination rate from seed is so slow that I don't have the patience for that. And I want flowers, and flowers are usually the second year out of seeding. And so I'd rather have it from a cutting ready to go. And thyme, a bit the same way, a little bit of an erratic germination. French tarragon is kind of the real hit on this one. It must be from a cutting because it doesn't produce a viable seed. So if you want the true French rich licoricey tarragon, then you need to have it from a cutting. And then also sage and mints, kind of the same thing. They just really are quicker. They're better if they're from a cutting, especially a mint. If you really like the flavor, it's a little sweeter, a little different. Some, all mints have a little different flavor. Pick the one you like and get a cutting from it, because sometimes it won't stay true to its seed. And then when you're out in the garden, just remember some are real rampant spreaders, and I think that's just kind verbiage for what they are. They can be thugs a bit. So mint, lemon balm, both are spreaders beyond their root systems. So keep them in pottery, just know that in your garden. And then borage is a bit of a seeder. It tends to spread its seeds all over the place. So you have to be a little bit careful about those. These are just things I want you to start to recognize as you're growing. And then some you just can't have enough of. And like I said, if you want to have just one herb because that's the one you really want to grow or you want to do a lot with, then grow lots, put room for it. To me, in my garden, if I had, I don't know, I'm going to exaggerate and say ½ acre of basil, I don't know if I'd have enough. I can't get enough pesto, those types of things. And in my climate, based on where you're at too, lemon verbena is a bit temperamental, and so it will not survive our winter. So I grow lots, and I harvest a lot as well. And so here's something, just kind of recognizing a little bit, and then we come to the discovery of the flavor. And I wish at this point in our program today that we could all scratch our screen and do a little scratch and sniff moment, because this is where herbs come alive, is when you take a leaf and you taste it, you smell it, you rub it, the essential oils are just dripping all over your fingers. The fragrance is coming alive. That's the recognition of what it tastes like as well, because all of those essential oils, that's where all the flavor is. And so if it's a very heavy herb, like I'm going to say rosemary, most of you are probably familiar with rosemary, heavy, oily, rich, those are the kinds of things those aromatics, that's the flavor. So that tells you that rosemary is going to be quite pungent in recipes. And then there's some that you have to kind of coax the flavor out, like lemon verbena, marjoram, things like that. You have to really rub on them just a little bit to get them to release their wonderful aromas and flavors. But it's really that discovery is becoming familiar. I'm not much of a recipe follower, but I did put recipes in the book because every once in a while people need to have a recipe, but I like to experiment. I like to know that this pungent herb I can put into a vinegar or a butter or something like that. And so if you start that journey and kind of say, rub the leaf, and then how would you put the words, what the flavor description is. I think that was fun. I had to do that in the book. Like if you had to describe basil, is it like cloves or a little bit licoricey, cinnamony, something? It's very pungent, but very recognizable. And that's the part that I think is really fun about being an herb gardener, is recognizing a leaf and recognizing the flavor as well. And then once you've kind of, journeyed these into your garden, you're starting to recognize, I can't have enough basil because I love it. More marjoram, more whatever the plant may be. Then the next thing is you need to kind of know a little bit about harvesting and drying. And so I'm going to be a little bit, I'm going to say generic on this and say generally in drying what we'll do. And as we get into our program a little bit later, I'm going to have individual herbs I'm going to talk about, and I'll try to, target what parts of it you dry. But that's what you need to know. Do you want the leaves like you do on mint or basil or sage? Do you want the stems like you do on chives? Or do you want flowers like chamomile or lavender? And so knowing which parts to harvest is really important in this. For the most part, on most herbs, you can eat kind of all of those pieces, but some of them have the pungency and the flavor that you want. And so, you know, if things, all of the flavors in the leaves, you don't necessarily want the flowers, like mint and basil and things like that. And then when you harvest them, generally the best way to harvest an herb is in the morning after the dew dries, before the hot sun is on them. And the reason is, if you've ever, and you just kind of dream this for a moment, wherever you're at in the country, what your summer is looking like right now is you would walk in the garden about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the bees are going mad and the lavender is very fragrant, or whatever herbs, you can just smell it in the air because the heat from the sun is releasing those essential oils into the air. It's their job to attract pollinators and all of those good things they do. So we want to kind of catch those herbs when we're harvesting them for drying in particular. Catch them in the morning when they're just, you know, they're not wet from dew, but the hot sun isn't releasing all of that goodness out of them. Those are the kinds of things that you're looking for and how to dry. And I'll briefly describe this picture that you're seeing with the paper bag. That is a technique I use for drying. I actually take the bundle of herb, put it inside a brown paper bag, not plastic, but just a paper one, wrap a little string around it. It's bundled with a rubber band, put the bag around it, wrap the string around it. So as it's drying, and if you've ever dried an herb like rosemary or lavender, all the bits and pieces fall off and then they're all over the floor, and you're certainly not going to harvest that for food. And so this bag will catch all of the goodies down inside of it as it's drying, and they won't get dusty and that kind of thing. And then when it's completely dry, you can shake that bag and all of the leaves will fall in the bottom, and then you've harvested. So you've kept things nice and fresh and clean. So those are just some real kind of basic things on harvesting. So once we've harvested, or we're out, we have fresh in the garden kind of moments, we have to figure out now how to make all of these plants pourable, like liquids, spreadable, like butter, or something you can shake on into food. And so this is kind of the next step, is how we turn that leaf that is not spreadable or pourable and put it into a form that it is. And that's what a taste for herbs is all about, is really how you put it into these different forms and use them to enhance. So one thing about A Taste for Herbs specifically, the book, and really this journey we'll take today, is this is about seasoning food. This is not the main dish. This is how you take these plants, these wonderful fragrant plants from your garden, and you use them to season and to enhance, and not really, they're not the main dish. They're not going to take over everything, but they're going to make that piece of meat or that vegetable or whatever you're putting it in, they're going to make it enhanced and better. And so we want to figure out how to put these herbs into that form to do all of that. So one of my, so spreadable, of course, is easy as butter. And I tend to call butter the kind of gateway into your herb flavor journey, because you can infuse almost any herb into a butter and it becomes spreadable. So then you can use, like in the picture you see here, there's a little rosebud sitting on what looks like pink butter. And in that pink butter are the rose petals and some mint, and a little bit of honey mixed in with the butter. So then that becomes a spreadable form of all of those. Basically, all of those flavors are now in that butter. So then you can spread this, imagine with me, warm scones or warm sugar cookies or a piece of toast, putting this kind of sweet butter on it. That's one way to really get a flavor out of an herb. And then the other photograph you see is actually a more savory one, a little more peppery, a little more spicy. So it has oregano and things like that in it. The red that you see are actually the petals of a bee balm flower. And so those bee balm, the petals you pull right out of the flower head are very, they're very peppery, was a good way to put it. And so they'll add a little bit of savory pungency to them. So spreading herbs into butter is a really fun way to kind of get started on a journey. The easy one is just make chive butter and put it on a baked potato. That, I mean, done, easy, and very flavorful at that too. And then of course, adding flavor, vinegars and oils And what you're doing with vinegars and oils is you're really just capturing all of that flavor into a pourable form. And so then it becomes something like with vinegar, if you pour a real savory vinegar, rosemary, or this one is tarragon, you pour that over meat, the vinegar will help to kind of soften the meat and not make it so tough. But all of that flavor from that plant is now in that liquid. So the liquid becomes the flavor magic in there. Same with oils, using them in sautés and things like that. So this is all about infusing. It's capturing is what it is. And then in the ice cubes, which you can see in the other photo here, this is one, to me, ice cubes, easy, easy, easy. So this, you can see a mint leaf. And so in each section of an ice cube tray, put in your herbs. Let's say mint, as you see photographed here. The other ice cube is borage flowers. But if you put mint leaves in each one, freeze those cubes up solid, then you can pop them out and put them in one of those zip closed bags or freezer bags to store them in the freezer. And then imagine you're having a cup of very hot tea and you want to cool the tea down just a fraction, drop in a mint ice cube. So all of that herb flavor just melts right into that cup of tea. Or if you're heading out for the day to go do a workout, throw in some mint ice cubes into your water bottle, and then it'll keep the water obviously iced down, but it'll infuse that flavor into there. So it's a really great way to capture, and I have a little bit about freezing other things and how to use them, but these are really easy ways to really capture and take that leaf and make it something that will melt into another thing. And so that's the flavor that you do. And then infusing, and to me, infusing is just basically adding herbs to water or another liquid, and you're just taking all of that wonderful aromatic out of the plant and getting it into the liquid form. So a few things you see here, obviously tea, and I have my cup sitting here right now with me, a cup of herb tea. That's what this is. A tea is an infusion. So you're taking a plant, subjecting it to water, all of the flavor goes into the water. So tea, and then infused waters, like you see where the strawberries are hanging out in the photograph, that's actually a strawberry, lemon verbena, and little bits of lemon juice and lemons in there to make kind of a strawberry lemonade moment. Really easy to do, and this is great for summertime. Just put all of those ingredients in the water and then stick it in the fridge, and then you've got this just flavor powerhouse because all of the herbs have melded in with that wonderful fruitiness of everything and that little squeeze of lemon that makes it a lemony flavor. And then the other photograph you see is a lemon verbena vodka, actually. So there's a little touch, if that's your choice of drink, you can infuse herbs into liqueurs like wine and vodka and brandy, things like that. These are actually recipes in the book. I have a rose petal infused brandy, just some fun twists on things. But what you're doing in all of this is you're grabbing that flavor, and how are you going to make it pourable and usable into another form? And if you don't want the leaves in there, you get a liquid, and that's what this is doing for you, is giving you all of that. And then shakeable. So how do you make these leaves shakeable or these flowers or whatever it's going to be? And that's really talking more about drying and turning them into seasoning mixes. And so what you're looking at here, you can see my arrow, the brown sugar rub, lavender, salt, and pepper. This one doesn't have salt, but it has just about every wonderful thing from your herb garden, oregano, thyme, things like that. And so what we're talking about here is making things shakeable. So lots of drying going on, and I briefly talked about drying before, but this is your way to kind of store. This is a quick moment to say how you store your herbs. I keep them all in glass jars, not plastic, very specifically because the oils will bleed into the plastic, and so you lose some of the things that you tried to harvest so carefully. So you want to keep them in glass jars, and then store these in a cabinet where they're away from sunlight and heat and that kind of thing, so that they stay fresh, and the shelf life on these will be harvest to harvest. That's my favorite way to say this, is harvest like mad in one season, dry them, use them throughout the year, and then when you're coming around the corner to the next year to harvest, you should be out because you've used everything, and then you're going to harvest again. They'll have a longer shelf life than that, but they stay fresher if you use them within 6 months to a year, something like that. So that's kind of the journey that we take through how to capture flavor. And so at this point, I'm going to start really going through some individual herbs and talking more about what they will do for you. And wanted to check and see if there's any questions or anything has popped up that we want to talk about, or I'll just keep on going and we'll learn more. Is there any questions on this one?
Not so far. I do have
Okay.
to say you have already mentioned some of my favorite blends, so
Yay.
let's keep going.
Awesome, perfect. So now that I have your rapt attention, let's go on to some other herbs here. So these are individual things. I kind of talked a little bit more generally before, but now I want to talk about some, and as I said in the beginning, these are actually going to be, I bet you know every one of these. I bet you do. Or you've grown them, or you've tried, or this is your chance to go, I know that, I'm going to grow it because I got it in a food in a restaurant or something like that. So we're going to start, most of these are alphabetical. So of course, basil right at the top of the list. Here's that funny description. I thought, how do you describe basil? It's kind of clove-like, anise, kind of licorice, but as far as I'm concerned, it's very strong and very recognizable. I think if you learn how to, or you recognize the fragrance of basil, you know it right away. And it really is, sometimes it just pops right into your head that it should be in your tomato sauce for your pasta dishes, things like that. I do love growing these colorful basils, like red Reuben, which is that deep maroon color you're seeing. Boy, I use that in container gardens as a substitute for, like a Coral Bells or a Coleus or something like that, because it's just such beautiful color. Red Reuben is that cultivar, and I think it's really sweet. And so, but then you'll have stuff to harvest because you want to do this. You want to start using it. And I feel like I can never have enough basil. I just want more basil. Because I do a lot of things with it. I suppose if you're probably very familiar with pesto, most people are and have used pesto. And so, if you don't have enough basil, you'll defoliate a plant in a heartbeat just to make a patch of pesto. So make sure you're growing a lot of this. The trick in our area, I'm in the West Coast, and so I'm up in the Tacoma, Seattle area. And I always say I put out my basil June 15th because it loves warm weather. So wherever you're at, if your nighttime temperatures don't hang above 45 degrees or so, you need to wait until they do. That's when basil will perform at its best. It stops leaf production if it gets a little cool in the evening. So that's something to remember about successfully growing it in your garden. And then I'm going to go back to, you can see the ice cube tray here in the photo, and that is, so what you see up in there, kind of pushed into each square of that ice cube tray is a basil oil paste. And what a paste is you're basically taking these fresh herbs and you're grinding them up a little bit, just in a culinary type of chopper, and then adding a little bit of either olive oil or avocado oil, whatever kind of your favorite oil is, something that isn't very strong and pungent in itself, and then adding it in until it just makes kind of a pasty form. And then what you're going to do is put them in each ice cube trays. As you can see, they're being pushed into this tray, freeze those, and then you have this kind of powerhouse of flavor that already has the oil in it. So it's really perfect for stir fry and sauteing, things like that. Or if you wanted to add to a very creamy soup, you just drop that frozen cube of basil oil paste, is what I'm going to call this, and it'll melt into it, and it works really well. This is it's very flavorful. It's a really good way. Also, it helps to kind of preserve that color a little bit. And keeps it kind of nice and rich. And then, you're mostly familiar with tomatoes, those types of things. It's really a nice pungent herb to use in your garden. One trick to growing, and if you can see my basil melon smash, that's just kind of your cocktail for the summer moment. It's got some melon in there, and then it's got some basil with some vodka. mixed in and it's all mushed together. It's very refreshing, by the way. But I want you to take a peek. There's a basil there with a flower on it, and that's our reminder to take that flower off. I didn't for the photo, but you want to keep the flowers of basil nipped off during its growing season, because once it starts to flower, the plant gets a signal that it needs to go to seed. And once it starts to do that, it shuts down leaf production. So then we don't get leaves, and we want the leaves. So every time you see a basil flower starting to form, just go out and just pinch it off with your fingers and it'll continue to leaf out through the season. This is an annual, so it will not survive a frost if that's the climate that you're in. So another one, chamomile on the list. Most people are very familiar with chamomile because they have chamomile tea to relax themselves in the evening. It's also very much an interior, so chamomile is very calming to skin. You see it in a lot of lotions and skincare, baby products, because it's very calming. It does that too internally. So when you drink it as tea, it's very calming to your stomach, to your nerves. You drink it before you go to bed. Upset stomach reliever. That's why Peter Rabbit's mommy made him chamomile tea when he raided the garden, because his tummy was upset. So this is a really good soother. In the garden, it's a bit of a weedy type of ground cover. Excuse me. And so it really does a good job, but it's not really for every garden. I use this as a ground cover underneath my rose bushes because it just can spread around and be itself, but it doesn't disrupt the rose roots, and the roses don't mind that it's under there. And so growing chamomile is not always the easiest thing, but that sweet little daisy-like flower, that's the part that you want. And so if you want to put that, as a ground cover between stepping stones, under roses, under shrubs, it needs some sun. It doesn't take a lot of water, but that sweet little flower is what we're looking for. And it's for relaxation. I like to infuse chamomile into honey. And so then the honey will take on that kind of green apple vanilla-like thing that chamomile does. Here's that moment of trying, what is that flavor? I wish we could all sit and have a cup of tea right this moment so we know what that wonderful chamomile moment is like, because it's just that vanilla honey thing. But when you infuse it into honey, it becomes a sweet form of that you can use in tea, or you can see a little sneak of a recipe for a hot toddy, making chamomile tea, adding chamomile honey, a little bit of rum in there if that's your thing. You can leave the rum out. It's really relaxing, very flavorful, and it adds a little bit of sweetness. But you're really going after that flower. That's what most people know it for, is tea. Chives, everybody knows chives. Probably the most common herb everybody tries to grow, and sometimes you'll see it just growing like it was somewhere and it blew in seeds or whatever. I really love chives. I feel like I can't have enough of these either. If you're looking for pungency and that delicate onion thing, that's what we're getting for. So the stems, the green part that you harvest, and the flowers, everything on this is edible. So you're going to take those flowers and pluck off the petals and sprinkle them into a salad. They do really well in a salad or in a vinegar. If you were to put just the blossoms into a vinegar, a white wine vinegar, one of the milder vinegars, champagne vinegar, one of those, then what will happen is you will get this really wonderful, delicate onion flavor, and the vinegar will turn kind of a pale pink, so it's actually quite pretty as well. That you can shake right onto a salad or add a little bit of oil, make a vinaigrette out of it, and super easy, especially when the flowers are very abundant. Such a good pollinator attractor too. And then, of course, chopping them up, putting them on baked potatoes, isn't that the classic thing to do? This is in the allium family, so when you think allium, you think onions, garlic, things like that. That's what chives will do for your culinary dishes. It's just really that kind of oniony moment, so to speak. Cilantro, I call this the love or hate it herb. I guess there's some study that in your DNA, half the people love it, half the people hate it. I actually didn't like it, but then I started to use it fresh. And growing it and really picking it young and fresh, and realized I actually kind of think I'm in the like category. I do like cilantro. It is very pungent and very strong and very distinct. It has a very unique flavor, but also highly aromatic. And so a lot of times you'll see it in like salsa dishes or Hispanic kind of culinary dishes. But imagine like a cilantro pesto, which is this photo that you see with the cracker sitting in it, but a little cilantro pesto, put a little parsley in there to kind of tame it down, and I'll talk about parsley in a minute. But that will be, imagine spreading that on warm tortillas and having that as kind of an appetizer. It's actually very wonderful, very flavorful. This does not dry well, and so this is something you're always going to use fresh. And one of the things I always get asked is, how do you stop it from bolting and going to seed, which becomes coriander? I don't have a good solution for that, except for buying seed such as slow bolt, which will not bolt as fast as its name says it will, but that is its nature. It goes to seed very quickly, and so you want to harvest when you see leaves. I also recommend planting this in cooler seasons. So like when you plant lettuce in your area, out in your garden, plant your cilantro. It tends to prefer cooler weather. It's the heat that makes it bolt. So that's something to remember if you're on that on team cilantro, so to speak, then that's what you're going to want to do there. So dill is our next kind of hit list. Dill is very familiar to me. It smells like pickles. That's what we use to season pickles, is that dill. It's very delicate, and I think it's very distinct, especially in the leaves. And I really love the leaves. And a lot of times you'll see they'll see description, dill weed and dill seed. Dill weed is really the leaves, and that's what you'll see sometimes just being sold as a dried plant. And for me, in the summertime, you must have dill. If you're putting salmon out on the grill or baking it in the oven, you must have fresh dill. It just adds this wonderful, delicate flavor to it. It's very, very easy to grow. And it is very, very easy to seed. I will put that in there as well. As you can see, the lower photo is a shot of all that seed ready to spill off. It's actually that part you harvest when you make pickles. But if you don't want, excuse me, dill to seed all over your garden, then you need to make sure that you're cutting that seed head off before it's dropping all over the ground, or you will have little baby dill all over the garden. And you can kind of keep those or or pull them out, whatever it's going to take. But that will happen. But I think this is kind of one of that real fresh must. I don't have a lot of dill in my garden, but I love having a plant or two that I can just go grab and add to a dish. And there's also, in my book, there's a recipe on a dill vinegar, and the vinegar is super zesty, and I really like it on a salad. It just adds a really nice pungent flavor. And then you can see some other little tips that I've put on the screen for you. A tea made with the seeds will help a tummy upset. So if you have dill seed, you want to collect it, keep it in a jar, steep it in water for about 15 minutes, and you'll have kind of a tummy tea that will help kind of ease. It's kind of more like gassy stuff. That would be the word to call it there. We don't want to talk about gas, but that will help you. And it's a great pollinator, especially for swallowtail butterflies. It likes that umbel, that umbrella-shaped flower upside down that it puts on. So those are kind of some really great attributes of getting to know dill, because you may not have known this is pretty common, but to know a little bit more about how to use it and things that it can actually benefit doing are always a good thing. Fennel, very closely recognizable, much like dill. Some people get them confused. Fennel is going to have a very licoricey kind of fragrance and flavor. And so that's the distinction. The dill smells like dill pickles, and I don't even know how to describe it differently, but it smells like dill pickles. And fennel is very licoricey. And what you see in this pot, this white, beautiful pot, is this beautiful plume of bronze fennel. I actually use bronze fennel in container gardens because I think that's just dramatic, and I think it's gorgeous. And it'll pop that kind of plumy thing all summer long. You can cut the flowers off and it'll keep producing leaves. This usually doesn't overwinter. It's an annual in my area, and most of the time, if it does over winter, it can be a little bit of a renegade. It's kind of starting, I'll say briefly, showing up on some noxious weed lists. So check with your county extension office to make sure that's not happening in your area, because I don't want to be the person that spreads too much fennel in the world if we don't need to. But what you do in cooking is you use it on fish and you use it on chicken and things like that. But what it does is it helps, as you can see, improve the digestibility of food that is very oily or greasy. It helps your stomach kind of digest it well. So that's kind of a fun little note about fennel. The seeds are also very much that way if you have a fennel tea. So I kicked on to lavender. I think if I had to pick a favorite, this is probably it, and I think it is for a lot of people. I mean, my gosh, we name festivals after this plant, so everybody kind of has a love for it. It's kind of the all-purpose plant. It just does everything. It's a healer for your skin, healer for your body. We're going to talk today just a little bit about its flavor, because that's one thing that I think most people are less familiar with. It's very earthy. It's very kind of perfumey is how the best way I can describe it. And a lot of people say, yeah, I kind of get like the soapy thing going on. So don't let that stop you from eating it. If you want to eat lavender, I like those true English lavenders. The one that you see in the photo here, this deep, beautiful purple, is one called Hidcote, Hidcote, named after this sweet little garden in England. This one is a really dark kind of dwarf true English cultivar, because one of the things I found is the darker the purple on a lavender, the sweeter the flavor. So those are something to think about as you're kind of picking a lavender that you're going to use to eat, is kind of getting those darker, more true English varieties. The lavandines, which would be more recognizable by their other names, which is Grosso, Provence, things like that, those are more camphor and menthol, so they're a little more pungent on a different side, all edible, but still a little bit more pungent. And so I like to use lavender in both sweet and pungent dishes. This is one that crosses both boundaries. Lavender, salt, and pepper, mixing that kind of earthy, rich kind of perfume with salt and pepper, especially the pepper, really brings the liveliness of it out. And then I like to infuse lavender into honey. You can make lavender lemonade. The little picture of cooked carrots, that's the lavender honey glazed on the carrots. So doesn't that sounds like a really good side dish for tonight. If you've got fresh carrots in the garden, this is what you need to do. That would be really fun. So kind of looking at how you can use sweet, you're probably familiar with lavender lemonade. You're basically infusing lavender. This is make lavender simple syrup, which is really just sugar and water made into a syrup. Add the lavender buds to it, and then it becomes infused into this syrup. So there's a pourable form of lavender, and then what you can do is take a little bit of that syrup and mix it in with your sparkling water, which doesn't have a flavor into itself, just a sparkling bubbly water, and you've made your own lavender soda, which is really easy, and you have left out all of the bad ingredients and just put in some pure ingredients that you harvested from your garden, which is really fun. Marjoram, very familiar. It's a bit like oregano. They're really closely related in their plant world. But to me, marjoram is sweeter and mellower. So you can use it for a substitute for a lot of things, parsley, oregano, thyme, things like that. Marjoram in my area, so I'm a zone 8, so that just helps you when I say my area. It tends to not overwinter very well. So if you're colder than that, then you're probably going to have it called more an annual than a perennial. But to me, this one's worth growing because I think that oregano is a little pungent, and so marjoram is just a sweet, sweet, sweet version of oregano, which I really like. And of course, mint, the everyday craziness of mint. Everybody must have a mint plant, but everybody needs to put it in a pot because it's just gonna take over if you don't. So we want to keep it in a pot. But what it does is it's a cooler a refresher. So it brings blood to the surface of the skin. So it helps to cool and refresh. You can feel it tingle if you use it like in a shampoo or something. So it'll do that internally. So it'll actually kind of liven up the sweet part of your taste buds on your tongue, because it just kind of stimulates those. And so you can use it. That's why you see it in tea, in sugars, and this is actually an infusion in a white wine, so you can make kind of a minty little infusion with that. Mostly popular really for teas, things like that. And it's the leaf you want. This is when you do want to keep cutting those flowers off, so it stays really good in leaf production. And I also like to freeze a lot of mint ice cubes. I mentioned this before. And so putting those in your water bottle as you're heading out the door, that refresher. And then the upper photo here, you see, I want you to recognize a leaf really quickly. So this is spearmint. So you can see the leaves are a little more spear shaped, a little more pointed. To me, spearmint is kind of the magical one because it's a little sweeter than a common peppermint. And so when you say sweeter, it's going to taste sweeter on your tongue. And so you're going to be using it more like in a peppermint sugar or peppermint water or something like that. You're kind of getting a little sweetness going on to it. And that's what mint will do. Oregano, another one, very familiar in your tomato sauce for your pasta dishes. I really like it in stews. It's one of the pungent herbs. So when we say pungent, it's powerhouse. And if you're going to cook with oregano and you really want that strong aromatic flavor, then you're going to want to use a Greek oregano. And the Greek oregano is the one that flowers white. And there's a little tiny picture of it here. It's not the purple one. It's the one that flowers white. And there's literally some cultivar. There's one called Hot and Spicy. So that tells you what it's going to taste like. It's hot and it's spicy and it's a really sweet one. And so you can just put that into a really powerful dishes. We want red sauces and roast beef and all of those things that really kind of give you a moment of powerhouse to it. That's what oregano is really good for. Very strong, very aromatic, doesn't cross lines into sweet dishes. This is really kind of that savory moment. And here's our sweet little parsley, very mild. I call it the little herby flavor. And a lot of people just don't give parsley the credit it's due. I love parsley, and I always say it's kind of the Eeyore of the herb world. You know, thanks for noticing me on the side of the dinner plate or whatever, but it's really a really great herb. You can see two different cultivars in the picture, a flat parsley and a curly parsley. And so the flat parsley has a little more flavor to it. So that's the one you're going to use really the most in cooking. The curly one's fine, but the flat one you use mostly in cooking. And this is actually really a fun recipe to try. This is gremolata, which is, it's basically a paste made out of parsley, garlic, and lemon. And you can use this, I love to dip fresh veggies in this, and it's super easy. Just put it in your chopper and get it chopped up into just kind of a minced up little pieces, and then, you know, stick it on the side, or, you know, glaze it over the top of fish. I mean, there's just lots of really fun ideas. That garlic and lemon really bring the parsley to life. And I really like to use the flat leaf in this. So give parsley a little bit of credit in food. It also, if you end up accidentally putting in too much garlic in a dish, like a soup or something, add parsley, and the parsley will help to tone down the garlic. That's kind of a little culinary trick that I learned. So we'll go to roses, earthy, musky flavor. I think the best thing I can say about roses, because I'm sure you're all very familiar with what a rose is if it doesn't smell, it's not going to taste. We have to have the fragrance to get that aromatic flavor as well. And so if it doesn't have flavor, or I'm sorry, fragrance, it doesn't have flavor. So remember that. So I tend to grow the rugosas or the old-fashioned apothecary roses, and I collect the petals, let them dry. I use them in sugars, and I use them in tea, and all kinds of different kind of sweet dishes. Like, remember back into one of the slides, we had a butter with this infused into it. It's really kind of a smell flavor relationship. What it smells like, it tends to taste like. So some people think it's a little perfumey, but when you add a little bit of sweetness or a little bit of lemon to it, really brings the roses out into the flavor very, very well. And to me, sometimes I think a rose smells a little bit peppery. So I put this recipe together. It's basically pink Himalayan salt and the red peppercorns or the telecherries. And you're going to take some rose petals, grind those together, just grind them down really easy in a coffee bean grinder. Don't use it for coffee beans anymore. Use it for your herbs, but grind it down and pulse it till it becomes a little bit of a powder. And then this is really good to sprinkle on. Have you ever just walked out in the garden and grabbed a fresh cucumber, peeled it, and just wanted to snack on it? Sprinkle this on it when you're doing that. That's really fun. Or mix it into a yogurt, a plain yogurt or cream cheese or something, and make a dip out of it. Super simple, but you get this real interesting peppery rose moment that is really a fun adventure if you're not familiar with using roses specifically as seasoning. And of course, the rose hips, these large ones that you see, which are very large, these are the rugosa hips. And so those have some really kind of magic to them, lots of vitamin C, that kind of thing. So grow rugosas. They're pretty tough roses all over the country. They don't get a lot of disease issues or bug issues, but they're heavy producers of very fragrant petals and very big, big, big rose hips, which is nice. Rosemary, very pungent, very powerful. If you're kind of hanging above a USD zone 7 or so, sometimes this is a little tough to stay alive. One of my favorite hardiest cultivars is one called ARP, A-R-P, and that one will survive a little bit cooler weather. So if that's kind of the area that you're in, you might think about it. But this one is strong. So you want to make sure that you're using either very light-handed or in things that hold up to it, like roasts and things like that. I actually have in the recipe, or in the book, I'm sorry, a recipe on a smoked salt with rosemary, because smoked salt is powerful, rosemary is powerful. This just really hangs on. So I put dried rosemary into that. And wonderful, wonderful when you're grilling, like for a rub or grilling rub, because it will hold up to the heat of the grill. And so using rosemary, and you're just wanting that little leaf, you don't need anything else, and you just need a little bit of it because it really is intense and fragrant. Because of its intensity, it dries really well. So that's something to remember. And then sage, I don't grow a lot of sage, but I like it. I just don't have a lot of it because I'm kind of the person that just uses it as in the turkey dressing, and that's about it. And I know there's a lot of other sage lovers out there and a lot of other sage recipes, because almost every time I give this talk, someone will send me a sage recipe. So I'm learning more about how to love more sage. But it is kind of this interesting powerhouse. It's very dry and very earthy. And so to me, it's an enhancer. I don't use it alone in much. I use it in mixes because I like what it does when it blends with thyme and rosemary and some of these other Mediterranean pungent herbs. And so also in sausage, like breakfast sausage mixes. And you can, I have a recipe in the book, but here's a brief of it. It's rub sage, parsley, thyme, sea salt, black pepper, and then some red pepper flakes. That's a really nice dry rub also for pork and roast, very pungent, very strong. It'll hold up to everything. And then rub sage. If you've ever heard about rub sage, you're like, what is it special? It's actually just rubbed. That's what it is. And if you run it through a colander, as you can see in the photo, you push the leaves through the colander, and then it becomes kind of powdery and light. And really all this is doing is it's kind of making this a milder form, because if you chop up the leaves, they're pretty pungent, but this nice rubbed sage kind of helps to get rid of a little bit of the oil, but makes it a little bit flavorful, actually, a little more flavorful. You're not so beat up by the flavor that's too rich and too deep. Tarragon, French tarragon, this, I always have to honestly say it's not one of my favorites because I don't like licorice that much, but a lot of people love French tarragon. Very worth growing, likes to be dry in the garden and just kind of a little weedy looking, but you know, it is a flavor powerhouse. I mean, it's just really infuse it into vinegars and oils and use it as a really nice vinaigrette on a salad, all of those things. So French tarragon is tricky. Use it fresh because it doesn't dry well. And it can be a little bit weedy. I always hate to pick on plants when I really want you to grow them by calling them weedy, but this is one to kind of give you a heads up. It is. I do have a nice one in a pot. This is actually a photograph of one in my kitchen. And so, I'll have a little bit to nip off here and there just to add a little pungency to things. And then, of course, thyme, very earthy, nice kind of little ground covery thing that happens to it. You can use this if you don't have oregano and rosemary and the recipe calls for one of those, then go grab thyme because it will be a really good substitute for that, and vice versa. I mean, oregano or no thyme, you have oregano, use back and forth. They kind of are in that pungent, very Mediterranean earthy family, and so they can be used very interchangeably. I have a lot of thyme in my garden, both on the clock and growing this, and I really like thyme because I really like the flavor. My absolute favorite is lemon thyme. So you can imagine yourself sticking chicken on the broiler and sprinkling lemon thyme all over it. These are the upright thymes that I'm really talking about. Lemon thyme, silver thyme. You can kind of see some photos here of what they look like in the garden. They're not the real low creepers, but they will stay only about 12, 15 inches high or so. Really abundant. Mine are starting to flower. I usually just kind of shear off the flowers a little bit so I have better leaf production on those. And so kind of as we kind of get to wrapping this up, I feel like it was a little speed dating with herbs. So I hope that you picked up a few things. I wanted to talk a little bit as we wrap up and hopefully have a little time for questions, is how you finish and successfully do your flavor adventure. And that's what this is. It's an adventure. It's tasting a leaf and infusing it into something that you can pour it onto something else and kind of getting that journey. So your success in the garden is most herbs, and I'm just going to say this generally, most herbs prefer full sun. That's their thing. A lot of these are really in that Mediterranean plant category. So they need to have as much sun as you can give them. So you might have to put them in a pot and kind of aim them towards the sun if you have some shade issues. Soil needs to be well draining. That's very general for most of them as well. Herbs don't like wet feet. They don't like to sit in water. So make sure that your pot or your soil that you're growing in the ground is very well draining. And then water, every plant needs water. The good news is most herbs don't need a lot of water. They tend to be not drought tolerant, but low water use, which is a really good thing for the garden, especially if you're landscaping with them, like lavenders and rosemaries and things like that. We talked about what you need to know to grow seed or plants. Remember that part, figure it out, get to know the personality of the plant a little bit, what parts you harvest, leaves, flowers, seeds, things like that. And then just really how you enjoy them, how you find them useful and what you do. And so kind of in kind of the moment to wrap this up a little bit, I think wherever you are growing your herbs all over the country, and I visit gardens every time I travel, and of course I'm always attracted to herb gardens, and I really wish you flavorful and fragrant gardens. That's what I want to say for sure, and wrap this up with that, and kind of go on an herbal adventure. We'll call it that, instead of don't follow recipes unless you really have to. Just discover. That's what I want to say. So if there are any questions, we can maybe bump in and start that part.
All right. Well, let's join back in and do that. We do have a few questions. So one goes way back to the last time when we asked for questions. Right after that, you showed some jars with some black lids.
With black lids. I do.
And the question is, where did you get those?
It's really funny that you ask. I'm going to say I don't know, because I bought those many years ago and I don't remember where they came from. So, and it's really funny that you ask, because I think I get asked that all the time when I take those jars out. So I'm so sorry not to say. If I have to say, if I found the supplier for those, I'd probably do really well at selling them.
Right. Yeah. On your website.
Exactly. I'm so sorry I don't have a supplier for those though. Yeah.
All right, not a problem. Next question is, you mentioned a few drinks, And
Yes.
the question was, are there certain herbs that blend really easily with alcohol? And can you make some recommendations?
So like mixing like with alcohol, like vodkas and those kinds of things. Yeah.
Right.
So to me, I tend to say with alcohol, it's a lot of times it's the sweeter herbs. So lemon verbena, mint, lavender. There was another one that just crossed my head. It's gone. Which one is it? Roses. All of those things to me make a better liqueur type of mix. I actually have a brew going right now of lemon verbena in vodka, and that's actually really, really refreshing because you can add that to like lemon drops and whatever your kind of favorite cocktail is.
Okay.
So I would say you're sticking less away from the pungent ones, but more the sweeter herbs to do that with.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and having simple syrups with basil or whatever
Right.
available makes them, I think, probably go with any of them, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I always have a brew of lavender simple syrup in my fridge that I've probably made when I had enough to make some, and that can go. You can make your soda. You can add that to a cocktail. I mean, it just adds that sweet lavender moment that we kind of need in the summer, actually.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
strawberries and basil. So I tend to have the basil in my fridge all the time.
Nice
With
combination.
uh,
Yeah. Very nice.
strawberries and maybe a lemon. And
Yeah.
okay.
Nice
Uh,
combination.
Another question is, have you figured out a decent way to dry chives?
Yes, actually, well, I think it's decent. I actually will cut, that long stem that you have, and I'll cut it into little pieces. I'm going to say about a 1/4 inch little chops,
Right?
and I put that on a cookie sheet. I'll put a paper towel down, put a cookie sheet, lay all those little chopped pieces, and let them dry. And as soon as they're dry, which is really a matter of just days, not weeks or anything. It's really quick. And then I store them in a jar. That's how I do it. Or I freeze them that same way.
Okay. Yeah, I've frozen them before.
Yeah, yeah, easy to do. They don't always, yeah, you can just chop them up, put them on a cookie sheet, put the cookie sheet in the freezer. And then once they're frozen, take all that sprinkle off, put them in a canning jar that's freezer safe. And then you can just grab scoopfuls out of it because then they're not all frozen in a clump together.
Right. Good
Yeah.
tip.
Yeah.
Okay. Another comment about the peppercorn rose seasoning and how beautiful that is.
Pretty.
That was a great tip.
Yeah.
And let's see, are there question was lemon balm and lemon verbena the same thing, which they are not the same thing.
They are not the same thing. They're two different plants. Lemon balm, I always say, is recognizable. It looks like mint, and it is very closely related to mint, but it's also smells like soapy lemons to me. So very different, very hardy, bit of a rampant spreader in the garden. Whereas lemon verbena is a very much a sweet, sweet lemon flavor, a different type of leaf, very elongated. And it's actually where it's hardy is a big shrub. It doesn't grow on the ground. It's a big woody shrub. And so they're very different, and the flavor is very distinctly different
Right.
as well. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
yes. You smell those two things next to each other. They
Yeah.
smell like lemons, but distinctly different.
Yes, you'll know the differences. So that's your moment to go out in the garden and leaf to leaf. All right, who's who, and then you'll know. It's very true.
Absolutely. Last question was secret for de-stemming thyme leaves.
Oh, yeah, so I've tried different things, and I have to say I've almost given up because they're so minute. And so how I tend to dry and also use fresh my thyme now is I will harvest the kind of softer part of the stems with the leaves, not the woody part. And so those soft, and then I just chop all that up, stems and all, and just chop, 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 and that all goes in. And I'll dry it the same way and then just break it up, leaving the stems intact. So if you just leave that fleshier stem part, that's edible. Then you don't have to worry about taking all the leaves off.
And there's
And it works fine.
those things too.
Yeah, yeah,
Sure.
yeah, easy. Yeah.
My trick for that is when it's woody, is to start at the small end and just strip it.
Just let it go. Yep. 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 Just do a little stem stripping. That's what it is.
Fleshy ends, so definitely just chop those.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
great questions, lovely ideas and great things. One of my favorite takeaways is that bronze fennel in that tall pot. How stunning is that?
Yeah.
And that's going on my deck. So
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
headed.
Nice drama. Yeah. Beautiful drama. That's what it's a little bit of a drama moment you can put in pots. Last all summer long, pretty, and then harvest little bits as you need it. You won't defoliate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
That was
Yep.
a fun takeaway for me. Well, thank you
Great.
so much for joining us. Loved hearing all of your recipe ideas, beautiful photos.
Thank you.
We'll, checking in on those. Download the handout if you want some of the recipes, and get to cooking, get to growing for sure.
Get to cooking, get to growing, absolutely. And I want to thank also the Herb Society, first of all, for inviting me, but also for offering this. This is such a great, all of the webinars, everything, that's good resources. So definitely keep us all like really loving our herbs for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you again for joining us, and put the webinar for next month on your calendar. Susan Belsinger will be presenting incredible edibles, free flowers in your kitchen. So more kitchen edible adventures and journeys for next month. So that'll be July 25th. Information about that will be on our website soon. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Karen Kennedy, the Education Coordinator, and we'll be back with you next month. Thanks, Sue.
Well, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.